the complexity of mikveh in this country. I have a Kala who wants to go to the mikveh 4 days before her wedding instead of 3 days. The mikveh started asking questions. They wanted some sort of eshur. In the end, she worked it out. But Israel has the advantage of really bringing these laws of mikveh, of tarat mishpacha, to a much broader population, Jewish population, that would ordinarily encounter them in Chutz La'aretz. The disadvantage is there is a controlling aspect to it in forcing all brides to go through some sort of training, all brides to go to the mikveh, to bring letters to say that they've studied. And so I'm often reflective of that intersection between religion and state, between coercion and opportunity, that really are part and parcel of the mikveh experience in this country. Something not quite, certainly in the States, not relevant at all. A little bit more in, I believe, South American countries, South Africa, and in England, if you want to get married through the Orthodox rabbinate, then there too, there is an expectation and even a requirement, but certainly in America, I've had many brides get married. No one asks if they go to Kala classes. No one asks if they go to the mikveh. And so there's a much more freedom of expression, which probably is reflective of America in general. Tonight's talk is really, we called it Reframing Mikveh and Reframing Harchakot. Harchakot already, I'll start off by saying, is not language that I like. Harchakot means literally distance. And one of the things we want to encourage as Kala teachers, as people studying or practicing these laws, is intimacy and closeness during this time. And yet we call laws that particularly reflect sexual separation, physical separation, harchakot. And so one of the things I do almost immediately is both acknowledge the term and say, we're not going to use it. We're not going to use a term that is about distance. We're going to use a term, we're going to talk about closeness. We're going to talk about how a couple can foster and develop and work on intimacy, emotional intimacy, even when there is sexual and physical separation. And so to me, terminology is very, very important. And so when we start learning that there are things that I point out that potentially can create a sense of alienation or distance, how do we overcome that? How do we compensate for that? So we're going to be talking tonight about what I like to call the laws when the couple is nida. As Naomi knows, and some
I
of you
don't
know
if everybody is having a hard time here,
if everyone what?
or it's just me, but I'm having the.
Oh, so let me take off these. This might be better. Hold on. Is this better? It could be with my headphones weren't very good.
Might have been mine because I got booted out afterwards. So go ahead.
What I'm actually going to do first, before I get started, is just I'd like to go around and know who's here. We're not that big a group. If you could just go around, I'll call on you and just tell me where you're zooming in from so we can get a sense of togetherness. And if there's anything specific you want me to address before I begin talking a little bit about my own approach to laws of behavior when the couple is nida. Deborah, where are you coming in from?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
Oh, lovely. Okay, Leah?
Lunchbook.
Lunchwood. Okay, Jackie?
Sorry. Hi, I'm in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois.
Oh, wow. I don't think I knew you had moved there. Okay, interesting. Luz, I know that you're in England, correct, right now, in London? I assume that's where you are. That's where I last was in touch with you. Shuli, I know you're in El Azhar. Miriam, where are you in from?
Kiryat Arba.
Where?
Kiryat Arba.
Kiryat Arba. Okay, we're really getting an international flavor here. Mili?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Okay, you're still where I thought you were. Talia?
Hi there. I live in the Boston area.
Boston, okay. And Cecil?
Baltimore,
Baltimore.
Maryland.
Okay, yes, I used to do NCSY in Baltimore, know it well. Michal?
Beit Shemesh.
Michal's in Beit Shemesh, okay. Aviva?
East Brunswick, New Jersey.
East Brunswick, okay. Robin?
Yerushalayim.
Yerushalayim. Tikva? Tikva?
She's in Croatia.
Croatia, wow. Okay, did I get everyone? I feel like 1, 2, 3, 5. Yeah, okay, that seems to be everyone. Oh, okay, I see a few more people coming in. I'll ask them as they come in just where they're from. So we also get a sense geographically. One nice thing about Zoom is it creates a classroom internationally, and we're all sitting here together and learning together. I'll also take this moment to say, what are some of the challenges you faced when teaching these laws or experiencing these laws? Is there anything you want to put out there that you would say interests you? Why come to a session on reframing harchakot? Something you've come up with in your teaching or maybe your own personal practice. Anyone want to unmute?
I'll chime in here. I find it very challenging teaching the feminist women or the equality between the two. Why can a woman eat off a man's plate and why can't a man eat off of a woman's plate? Why? And I find that very challenging. I don't have a good answer, but I want to have a good answer.
Okay, good. That's a good example, and I'm glad you said that because I'll make sure to reference how I teach it. And I think what you're saying is very important, and I think I'll address that. Anyone else have something else that they have struggled, challenged, something they'd like to hear specifically? Because that was a very good example.
Hi. If we can touch upon the gray area, if that exists, like the farhesia, if need be, pictures, girls ask a lot of times those questions.
Sure, great. I had that question today also when I taught a couple. Good question. Public versus private space. Are there differences in behavior in the nuance of halakha? And the answer is yes. I can answer that. Okay, maybe one more before I get started. So I'll just say, when we look at categories, I often really, these laws take up a lot of headspace for couples as they navigate incorporating nida. But in terms of the Shulchan Aruch, it's actually one very short siman. It only really has 5 categories to it. Hold on, I'm going to put in my headphones again because my husband is making some noise in the kitchen. And hopefully it was me, not my speakers. Tell me if you, I hope you can hear me. If you can't, let me know. So really what we talk about, right, sexual intercourse is the prohibition. There's no argument there. Sometimes I get asked, and if I can be explicit, I'm going to be explicit at times. I've been asked, does that include anal sex? Yes, anal and vaginal sex are part of what we'll call the biblical prohibition with the ensuing karet that the Torah talks about. One of the things I also do when I teach in my opening class is show that the language of Torah in chapter 20, verse 19, really shows mamash intentionality, the man and the woman uncover. And, I let couples give them a little space if it happens in a moment of passion, if it happens unintentionally, but things happen, you're not chayav karet. Karet has to be b'mezid. And I try to normalize, right? There are times that we get carried away, we get swept off in passion. It's not because we're intentionally rejecting God's covenant. A lot of what I try to do is really alleviate a sense of incredible punishment, guilt, fear. Much more about empowerment, more about ownership and feeling a sense of agency. When we talk about sexuality and we talk about bodies and intimacy, very important to try to leave behind language of coercion. Even when couples say, oh, I don't really have a choice, I say, no, of course you have a choice. Nothing is good, right? You are choosing to be religious. You are choosing to be observant. This is not happening to you. This is a choice out of belief, a choice out of commitment, whatever this is. But this is not, you are not coerced into doing this. Maybe it's a choice because you chose a certain partner, but I really try to steer clear of language of this is falling upon me and I have no choice and I'm in this and I hate this and so on. I'm absolutely open to this is very hard and this is a struggle and it's very difficult for us. And we find that we're struggling to succeed in the goals we're setting. But I very much try to avoid language of retribution and punitive and so on, and talk about that for some couples, there may be a gradual incorporation, and I'll come back to that a little bit. I feel that many couples feel the heavy weightiness of a particular pasuk in the Torah, and not recognizing that it's part of a larger choice to keep halacha, and how do we keep halacha, and what happens when something is difficult for us, and how do we respond, and broaden it outside of the particular experience of these halachot. And so I lost my train of thought. Hold on one second. I'll get it back in a moment. Oh, choice, consensuality, ownership, agency. Those are very important words to use. And when inviting kalot or inviting women I speak to or I counsel into the conversation, and I'll just quote, I had a couple come talk to me. I do teach quite a few mixed couples. One is religious, one is not religious, or more religious, less religious. And he said something that was very touching to me, but I think guided me afterwards as well. I came here thinking you were going to tell us all the things we couldn't do. And I feel that what you offered us are the things we can do. And that's often nuance. It's often language. It's often how I present it. In halacha, there are things we can't do, but where do we put the focus? What is the focus on, and how we present and how the couple receives the information we're giving? Another thing I try very hard also in the first session to do is not promise them that this is going to enhance or solve any marital issues. It's not going to promise them incredibly healthy, beautiful, pleasurable sexuality. This is halacha. It's a tool in their relationship toolbox. And now how do we use it? And that really might be a good way for me to begin to talk that a lot of the work that I do is relationship work. And it could be many of you already intuitively do this, have intuitively incorporated this. But I talk a lot about the halachic framework is really in the background, but what's in the foreground is the relationship of the couple as it integrates and interacts this piece into their marital life. And by that, my line really is I don't romanticize these laws, and I don't demonize these laws. Some couples find them enormously beneficial. Some couples work to make them beneficial. Some couples never find them particularly meaningful or beneficial. And I'll even go as far as to say some couples will say these laws cause tension and strife, and they were never able to manage to turn it into something positive and meaningful, and they found other ways of dealing with it. And so it's very important to allow the couple to feel, I use that word ownership, a sense of ownership over their own experience, not tell them, well, this is going to be the perpetual honeymoon. And I think more and more we've moved away from any sort of blanket promises. Part of that, of course, is our awareness of how much divorce there is and abuse and dysfunctionality. I don't want to go to the negative, but the Orthodox and the Haredi and the Hasidic communities are not immune to serious marital issues, even when they're keeping this exactly as they should be. And so what I use that as a way of saying this will neither save your marriage nor destroy your marriage. It will be present in your marriage. This is something that will have presence. And what is that going to look like? And how are we going to begin the process of bringing this into our marriage in a way that is complementary and beneficial? How long is that going to take? I use words like expectation and goal setting, and that each of us may have very different responses and experiences around this. And one more thing before I get into the particulars is I talk about the different areas in which commonly couples have marital strife. Money is a big one. each other's families. Religion is often a source of tension if we're not exactly on the same page, and sexuality. And so now I have, those are just four, of course, there are many that spin off of those, but those are four fairly major categories in which couples may find themselves in couples counseling to resolve how they deal with any of these particular issues. And sexuality and religion coming together, of course, only expands outward the potential for difference of experience and opinion when integrating this. So as you can already tell, a lot of the work I do is normalizing, is presenting places in which there might be touch points of friction, of tension. And I also say, look, I'm not trying to impose upon you tension and friction. I'm just presenting, like relationship work in all of these areas, two people interfacing with the same experience are often going to respond differently. How do we deal with that? How do we communicate? How do we talk about it? And I keep talking about in the plural. Part of that is because it's very important to me to have the chatan come for at least this conversation. And one of the reasons I do that is because just recently, but it's not the first time, it sometimes turns out that each of them have a different expectation of how they're going to be keeping these laws. And while, of course, you can find this out after you're married, my personal opinion is that it's often better to preempt, not be reactive, but proactive in opening up certain conversations. And I'm going to give an example. A couple, and this has happened multiple times. It happened recently. A couple is not shomer negia before they're married. I get a lot of couples like that, a lot of very firm couples like that. And one or both may feel a sense of guilt, a failure. It's a whole other conversation about the premarital sexual space. And they're getting married. And one of them feels that as soon as they get married, they're going to be shomer negia, right? They're going to start keeping these laws as halacha demands. And the other one thinks, well, we weren't shomer before we were married, so we'll modify it. Well, we won't maybe be as sexual, but certainly we're going to have emotional touch. I mean, we've had emotional touch for the last 6 months when I've been nida. Why would that change? That's a really big relationship. That's not about halacha, right? That it is about halacha, of course. But halacha is only the backdrop to two people entering a shared space with a very different understanding of what that's going to look like. And to me, allowing the couple to begin recognizing and begin talking about, whoa, we have really different expectations here, rather than, I'll pause to give an example. Imagine after they're married, after they consummate their marriage, they're now prohibited. There was some blood, they're now prohibited. She goes in for a hug and he rears back and says, we're not touching, right? That's not a great place to find out that you're not on the same page. It's much better to find that out earlier and begin talking through that. And so that has happened quite a few times. I will say, again, I'm a big fan, and I think it was Robin who asked about the eating off each other's plates. I'm going to come to gender and sexuality shortly. I'm not a big fan of gendering these laws. I often, when I speak, if he's not eating off your plate, you're not eating off of his plate. Why? Because halacha does not take the female yetzer enough into consideration. And today I take the female yetzer very much into consideration, the female sexual desire. And so I'll often say, woman shouldn't walk around in a towel, and I'll turn to the chatan and say, and you shouldn't walk around in a towel either. If we're desexualizing equal opportunity desexualization. And I absolutely agree, Robin, that there's the reason why there's a bias towards male yetzer is because that's what a lot of the halachic discourse is about. But today, that given how much we know about female yetzer and about male and female partnership, I would even say, oh, the halacha says this, and I really strongly advocate that you act in a shared manner towards one another. But now I'm going back to the touch piece. and the expectation and the idea of opening up communication so that we can begin to understand that both of us are going to be necessary to keep these laws. The idea that if one person thinks we're not touching at all after we get married and the other person is totally blindsided by that, that's a relationship piece to begin working through. What do I do if we're just not on the same page? If we don't share value around money, we can each have a separate bank account and then work out something for shared expenses. If we don't agree on how often we see each other's families, we can probably come to some compromise. You want to go every week. I want to go once a month. We'll work something out that hopefully is not too hurtful and we'll both be happy. But in the case of Nida, in the case of these laws, in the case of the halachic aspect, both people have to buy in order to be successful. Even other aspects of religion, I keep Shabbat more stringently than you do. Okay, obviously we can have a discussion that when you heat up the food, I want you to be more stringent with food heating than maybe you were at home because it's really important to me, and so on. But we can each find spaces in Shabbat that are comfortable for each of us. I can go to certainly to an example of a religious and a not religious couple where the bedroom might be where she or he can go on their phone, but in the shared space we don't, right? I'm just giving examples how with many other aspects of religious practice, we can have difference and resolve it by each of us doing our thing. When it comes to Nida, that possibility is really impossible because I can't keep it without my partner and my partner can't keep it without me. And my husband relies on me to keep it at a certain standard, or I rely on him to not push me to lower my standards. And really that's what I said, the intersection between religion and sexuality and individuality and yet partnership really come together in an interesting and unusual way so that we're going to have to work together in order to make this work rather than what some couples will do in other aspects is separate and okay, I do this and you do this and we'll figure out how to come together. I'm going to pause for a minute. Any questions? I know I'm talking. I really need to make a PowerPoint and maybe one day I will so that it's perhaps more visually interesting. But I want to talk a little bit more about the relationship piece, particularly around touch and how I work with couples on that piece. So anyone have a question or a comment? So many chats. If there's anything I need to see, Naomi, maybe you can tell me. Oh, okay. I will say that 95% of the couples I teach are not shomer negiah before they're married. And some of them are sexually active with one another. It's important to understand the population that I deal with. Most of them are religious. Some of them are mixed couples. I teach very few chilonim. I also don't teach a lot of very frum couples. Frum meaning like they're getting married very young and very quickly, or maybe they're a little older and getting married very quickly. For the most part, even the frum couples I'm teaching are not shomer negiah. I just want to make that clear. So a lot of what I'm talking about needs to be scaled in different directions. And I'll talk a little bit about how I deal with the shomer negiah couples, the ones who are committed before, who are committed after, who look to this to have the meaning they've been told it's going to have. And even if it doesn't, they're going to keep it. I'm in the process of helping a woman after childbirth, third child. She's been nida for 6 weeks. She's probably going to be nida for another few weeks. She has an unusual uterine issue that's causing bleeding and it's not really stopping. And they don't want leniencies around touch. He's not in the army right now. He's not going back to combat. There's no extenuating circumstance except that they haven't touched for almost 7 weeks. And emotionally, that is very, very difficult. And yet they're committed. They want to keep it. Are there any leniencies? Can they get to the mikveh early or something? So I do give yoetzet halacha advice. What I'm trying now to help her do is get to the mikveh despite some spotting, as long as the bleeding doesn't get heavy again. But I'm just pointing out, here's a couple who really look to this to be an integral part of their halachically and halachic observance, their religious practice, and so on. I often say to couples like that, there will be moments like this. For all that you respond to the meaning in the system, 6 weeks is a long time to not touch, and is shrika. It's very difficult. I had one woman tell me, I feel like we're living like sister and brother, and it's not good for our relationship. Like, we've been already 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, and we're so non-sexual at this point that I'm not sure how we're gonna reintroduce it. So I want to just state that, because when we teach this, we often there's a tendency to reinforce the positive, and I think it is important to give positive a positive meaning and so on to the commitment. But what we don't do enough is prepare couples for this, which is not positive, which is not beneficial, which is jarring and difficult and alienating and sometimes very sad. And we don't like to use those words with this kind of practice. And yet, if couples aren't at all aware that this can happen, then they're really not prepared for their experience. And we can't prepare people for everything. But when we talk about Nida, I think at the center of the way I teach is encouraging the couple to think constantly about their relationship and the impact on their relationship, and how they can work together, and what happens when they pull apart, and how are they going to resolve the differences, and what happens in a moment of 6 weeks without touch. How are you going to maintain closeness and intimacy when there's no physical connection? And that allows space to open up. Oh, this might be harder than we realized at times. At times, it might be exactly what we're looking for and really beneficial and really add to our intimacy, or we're going to work for it to add to our intimacy. And at times, this might be more challenging than anyone really led us to expect it could be. And yet we're committed to it. We're committed to it, and we're going to get through it. And maybe we'll be stronger on the other side, and maybe we'll just erase those 6 weeks so we don't have to think about how hard it is. People are resilient, of course. So the examples I'm giving are really about allowing couples to begin to recognize the presence and impact these laws are going to have on their, not just sexual intimacy, because that's one piece of it, on their emotional intimacy, on their physical intimacy, that there are going to be ramifications and repercussions. And it's not as simple as, okay, I'm Nida, okay, now I'm not. It's much more complex and layered than that. And each couple, of course, is its own experience, even though each couple, there are commonalities. I started to say that my experience is that men who are not Shomer Negiah, from men who have gone to yeshiva, I don't want to say, not in air quotes, from men, went to yeshiva, who find themselves not Shomer Negiah in a relationship moving towards marriage. Maybe they were Shomer Negiah their whole dating life, and then they begin to date towards marriage, and Baruch Hashem, their sexual chemistry and sexual tension and sexual desire, and they begin to not be shomer and have some sexual experimentation. My experience is that more men than women expect after marriage to keep halacha, that there's something in that mindset of, I allowed myself to deviate because there was no real other outlet, because we were building something, because we were moving towards commitment, and it was justified, even if it wasn't right. But once we're married, that's it. Now we're keeping it. And the women are almost like, what are you talking about? Like, I need emotional touch. I didn't think it was going to be all or nothing. What's going on here? So I do find that paradigm repeat itself often, that the men get married and are like, okay, no more guilt, no more conflict, no more violating halacha, because now there's sexual space and sexual outlet. And I wonder, it would be interesting to explore this a little more. First of all, men tend to be more rigid in terms of rule following and boundaries, and like not having gray areas, and women tend to be softer. But I'm sure it works the other way. I've met enough couples where the woman is like what we think the man is what we think the woman is. So, but my experience has been it's very typical that the man is there, and then the woman is like, what is going, I don't understand. Like, you've blindsided me. I thought we were just going to continue, maybe a little less sexually, but with emotional touch. And by the way, that discovery, I already brought that up, is a difficult one, because there's almost a panic that sets in. How am I going to go 12 days without touch? I don't even know what that means. I can't. I'm a toucher. I'm a hugger. I get depressed. I have anxiety. It's so hard for me. And then the partner really has to work now to try to compensate. Right now, the burden is almost on him to say, okay, we're going to do this and I'm going to help you and I love you and you're going to see and we're going to try. And sometimes I encourage the partner to say, are there going to be timeouts someday? Is there going to be a willingness at times to say, okay, we might need to have some touch and set our goals, let's see how it goes over 3 months. Not to make a non-halachic decision, I call that, if your partner is really struggling. And I don't tell them what to do. I don't pretend nothing. I'll never say it's halachically okay. Well, we'll talk about when I say it is halachically okay, but I won't say that it's regularly halachically okay to touch, but I will say, let's talk about the relationship and the impact and what this is going to look like. And are you ready? And are you ready? And that will, again, let's be real. This is a lived experience and your lived experience. This is not a book of halacha. What makes this very different than Shabbat and Kashrut is that it touches us in the places that are very deep and very private and very personal. And for every person, that's unique to them or to their sense of experience. And so it's not something that's really learned or reflected in a book. Sometimes the books can be very frightening because you're reading the clinical language of law, and yet in your body, it feels very different. And so this is all part of opening the awareness around where this is going to meet the couple in their relationship and allowing them to have conversations about this. And what I often do to deflect, because I don't want to, I'm not their therapist and I'm not a couples counselor. I have a lot of experience in a kind of pastoral counseling, but I try to also move it out. Oh, okay, we've talked about this. Now, let me just tell you what I've seen, different kinds of couples. And I'll talk about couples that neither of them are big touchers and neither of them are very sexual. And that for them, nida can sometimes really work very organically because non-sexual space where they're not touching and not being sexual is actually not too challenging. They have other love languages. They're I don't want to say okay, they miss each other, but it's more organically and naturally part of their love repertoire to do acts of service and gifts and so on. And then when they get to sexual space, it could be really exciting and wonderful, and then don't have a strong need for touch or sexuality. Really, I don't get a lot. The other extreme are two people where both of them have a very strong touch language, sexual and physical, and the need for physical intimacy is painfully acute. And without it, it's like taking oxygen out of the relationship. It doesn't mean they can't navigate nida, but it means that for both of them, it's going to be a struggle to try to work on other love languages. Sometimes there will be an awareness and like, okay, we can't not touch, we have to work out new boundaries. Sometimes they get through it, but they find it very, very difficult and stressful and strifeful. And the pill has been obviously a wonderful solution when women can take it in reducing the impact of nida. At which point I'll stop and say there's no mitzvah to be nida. No mitzvah. If a woman does not get her period for 20 years because she's pregnant and nursing and the pill, obviously then she goes to the mikveh after birth. But a woman who's on an IUD for 5 years and doesn't get her period, there's no mitzvah they're not keeping. And I've talked to many women who say that saved them. Not getting their period for 5 years at a time made nida bearable. I just want to hold that, because I have to hold it against all the literature that says this is the best thing for your marriage. And yet we have women who say, better to take it out so that we don't have strife in our marriage. And that more and more poskim are aware of that. And so the advice sometimes will be from Rabbanim, once they let you be on the pill if you're going to the rabbi. Double pack, triple pack, don't get your period. It's not surprising that in the Haredi world, there's also tension around nida. The idea that, it's just not enough time today for couples to be together. 12 days off, 16 days on. It's not a lot of time in our busy lives, and it creates tension. Oh my God, you're going to get your period in a few days. Have we taken advantage? Etc. So the pill and the hormones and so on have been really beneficial to many couples when it works in minimizing the presence of NIDA. So that works for a certain population of couples where hormones work, where hormones are beneficial, where hormones allow for a reduction in the experience of NIDA. And I think more needs to be said about that as we teach, we often reinforce again the positive and the benefit, which is great, but I like to be real and acknowledge that many people prefer to minimize the impact because of the challenges. And I'll just pause and say, lifestyle today is creating a good sexual relationship and having ongoing sexual intimacy has been challenged by electricity, by the internet, by, when people used to get into bed at 6 o'clock when it got dark. You can imagine, my colleague, Rabbi Elisha Anshelovich, Rabbi Doctor, and I have an ongoing argument because I live in NIDA today and he lives in NIDA in the Middle Ages. And from his perspective, NIDA was the best thing that ever happened to women, the extra 7 days, the 7 clean days. And I hear what he's saying, because he's basically saying women had a break because when there's no electricity, television, YouTube, internet, right? The men get into bed every night and they've worked hard all day and this need for a release and then going to bed. And so his suggestion is that it was actually enormously beneficial for women to have the 12-day, 13-day, whatever break in order to have some time to themselves. I don't disagree with him. And I would imagine, particularly before Masters and Johnson, right? Before women, we know that there are periods of time where women have less familiarity with their sexuality and
Quiet, please. It's time for bed.
What?
What?
Can you mute?
Don't
Maybe?
think it. Well, I'll mute people.
Yeah, thank you. And so I don't disagree with Rav Elisha, because I myself think that probably it was better for women's reproductive health and so on to have a period of time where there was a break. Also, marriages were not the partnerships they are today, where emotional touch and sexuality are part of greater intimacy. And so today, I remember a Kala saying to me, we don't have time to have sex. We work hard all week. On the weekend, we sleep and we visit family. And who has time? It's just not enough time. It was so interesting. And I think that has definitely become something that we're helping couples make time. Yes, you have to make time for sex. It doesn't happen necessarily in an automatic way. And so the pill became a way to buy more time. So we don't have to be so anxious and stressed. We don't have to program this into our busy week. We have an extra week, an extra 2 weeks, an extra month. And then also, we don't have to be as anxious about whether we're touching or not touching. We have to feel bad about it, etc. So, I've sketched out the couples for whom touch is less significant in their love relationship. And so NIDA can be a recharge, a jumpstart, an energizing aspect. The couples for whom touch is everything in their relationship, and removing it during NIDA can be really unbearably stressful. And so sometimes using the pill, as do many couples, to buy more time. And then I really want to talk about the middle, because the middle grouping are the largest and are the most interesting, in my opinion, with regard to NIDA and presenting NIDA. And I think will be will be helpful in thinking about how we talk about these laws. The middle grouping are those who have a gap or disparity in sexual and or physical need. Now, I'm keeping those two separate. For some people, sexual touch is part and parcel of emotional touch, and for some people, there really is a difference. We also tend to think men are more sexual, women are less sexual. I hope by now we're all on, we have enough experience to know that is not always true, and not infrequently I teach couples where the woman is more sexual and the man is less sexual. The woman wants more touch, the man wants less touch and a sexual touch. And so I try very hard there to remove gender from the conversation and not say, well, it's only about the man being super sexual and the woman needing a break, right? Sometimes it's the opposite. The woman is more sexual, the man needs a break. But disparity in sexual need, and this allows me to talk about this, is very, very common. And if you listen to Esther Perel, you know this. And if you've read any books by sex therapists, you know this. And it's same-sex couples and heterosexual couples. There is often a disparity, and it's one of the tensions. Remember, I mentioned there are classic tensions couples have in marital relationships. Sexuality is one of them. One person wants more, one person wants less. One person feels imposed upon, one person feels rejected. One person wants every night, one person or every day, and one person wants once a month. Those are not uncommon disparities in a sexual relationship. And this is where Nida, and this is where I really try to focus again on relationship, and that the more honest they are in the relationship and in this piece of the relationship, the more likely they are to succeed in integrating Nida. Now, of course, if they've had some sexual experience, they know exactly what I'm talking about when I get to this. If they haven't had any sexual experience, then they may be like, oh, interesting, we'll see what happens after. But what I talk about is that my language is not one of prohibition and prohibited, permitted. I talk about sexual space and non-sexual space. As you can tell, a lot of what I do is try to avoid overly focusing on language of transgression, language of mitzvah, language on permitted, prohibited, to try to remove what often comes with it, which is sense of failure and shame and guilt and so on. I like to use sexual and non-sexual space. I feel that now we're talking about the relationship and how they're going to build those spaces. And I point out to couples that often one person is more comfortable in the sexual space and one person is more comfortable, or at least more comfortable than their partner in the non-sexual space. At which point, by the way, couples who have some sexual experience will begin to perk up a little bit. And sometimes I'll see a little nod and an awareness, oh, she knows what she's talking about. And by which I mean that in sexual space, sometimes you have one person who wants to have sex more frequently, and the non-sexual space allows the less sexual partner to have some breathing room, have some time, not have to say no all the time. Right? That can really be good for the relationship. And then in sexual space, the less sexual partner can be more willing when it comes to sexual response to their partner. And that already changes. We're not talking about permitted, prohibited. We're not talking about harchakot. We're talking about their relationship and what happens in a relationship when we have different needs sexually. And how does that play out? And I often bring some of the stories, and I've collected them. And at this point, they're really, some of the stories really repeat themselves. So I'll just share one example. I once was on a lecture tour. I met a woman who was very sexual. She wanted to have sex every day, and her husband wanted sex twice a week. Again, by the way, that's already not a bad disparity. But they fought about it all the time, every day. She said she would ask and he would say no, and they would fight. And I love this example. He had body image issues. He was very insecure about his body, he had a bit of weight and so on. Again, we're so stuck on gender stereotypes. But he was the one with the body issues, and he was the one who felt a little out of shape, and she was the one who was super sexual. Anyway, they weren't religious at all, actually quite secular. And she had heard about Mikveh from Eish HaTorah. Fascinating. And she was like fascinated by a structure that removed the conversation around sex from the couple for 12 days. That idea that for 12 days, they would not be fighting about this, that there would not be expectation. It really entranced her a little, even though, again, she was the one who was more sexual, in recognizing this might be helpful to our relationship. It wasn't about God, it was about mitzvot and so on. And at some point I even said to her, do you want me to find you a mikveh? Because I knew the city and I knew a conservative mikveh. And she's like, oh no, I don't want to go to the mikveh. I just want the framework. I'm like, oh. And so fascinating, because I often say to couples, you are most likely to succeed when you recognize where it meets you in your relationship. What she heard, now again, she wasn't religious, she could do whatever she wants. But what she heard was, this will benefit our relationship because we fight so much about sex. We need something and we can't do it on our own. In other words, this idea that, okay, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, we'll have sex, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they couldn't do that without kind of an objective framework, and it was a Jewish framework that they could then tap into and say, oh, the Jews do this, so we'll do this also. We're not going to do it exactly like the rabbi says, but this is not about my saying yes and you're saying no, etc. This is what Jews do, and we're going to do this. And it's not the first time I heard that. I know another situation where, again, the man wanted sex every day, very, very grating on the couple, and they were totally not religious, and they started keeping mikveh to save their marriage. I will say it saved their marriage for a few years, and they ultimately still got divorced. But because, as we said, mikveh doesn't save marriages that aren't really functional. But it was an interesting lens for me to think about that idea that maybe it will create some sort of bridge over sexual disparity, especially when one person really has an expectation that is not realistic for their relationship. And instead of causing tension all the time, we have a space where there's no tension, and then maybe expectation can shift. And so I often bring this out when I talk to couples, these examples, this way of looking at it, this awareness. I bring another story of a woman. She was Ashkenazi, so like Yekka, a little bit of a Yekka, and she was married to a Moroccan, and she didn't look that religious. It's why I stopped having stereotypes. Only last week I stereotyped a couple, and I was wrong. I'm always learning. I'm always correcting. I'm always saying, okay, you thought you didn't have stereotypes, but you do. But I really didn't think she was religious. I thought she was like maybe Masorati. And we started talking about Nida, as we did this already years ago. And she said, oh, I actually keep it quite strictly. And I'm like, what? And she said, yeah, my husband's a toucher. And to be honest, I need a break. So we have now, look how honest this is, right? This is going to help our relationship by keeping it strictly, because then he won't touch me for 12 days. I love him, but I can't stand being touched all the time. And now I don't have to say no. And I don't have to say, please leave me alone. I have to say, please touch me. I know that every month I'm going to have 12 days where he doesn't like wrap me in a bear hug every day. Now, they seem to have had a very good marriage, but she needed a space that wasn't her asking for it, if that makes sense, all the time. And so another really wonderful example, it wasn't so much about sexual intimacy. It was about just, again, she's like, I'm a bit of a cold Ashkenazi. I married him because he's very warm and very, hot-blooded kind of thing. But the reality is sometimes it's too much. And this helps us. And so I bring these stories to couples to give them permission, essentially. Find yourselves. Find something in your relationship that is going to respond to this framework in a way that will make your relationship stronger. It may not be across the board. It may not be automatic. There's still going to be the 6 weeks, lo aleinu, of after childbirth or menopause, which could be even worse. We still can end up, as we're flying to our honeymoon dream vacation, getting my period a week early, and now we're going to, the Turks and Caicos and this beautiful villa, and one of us has to sleep on the floor or not. I told the story. I knew a religious couple. They flew out. She got her period, and she's like, "We didn't have sex, but we weren't exactly shomer for the rest of that vacation. What can we do?" Like, that. So different couples making different choices of how they're going to respond to the unexpected situations. But I try to bring those up with humor and realism so we can see this is real. This is not in a textbook. This is not in a halacha book. This is essentially your lives. And how you begin to integrate this will depend on, good communication, good expectations, good goal setting. I will say I once taught again, not religious couple, Masorati, they were living together. And she said something very interesting. She said, after I did this session, I did a session with both of them. And she said to me, we've been living together, Nechama, for a number of months. Obviously, they were having sex. And she said, we actually never talked about this. And by this, I understood she meant sexual disparity, the fact that we have differences, that we have different expectations. And she said, you opened up a conversation that we never would have thought to have. Thank you. And that's kind of, I recognize that this is not just about religion and halacha. This is really a blueprint or some direction I can give them of where sexuality and religion are going to meet where the relationship needs to do whatever work it needs to do. And we can call it whatever we want to call it. We can call it religious goal setting, relationship goal setting, halachic observance, but ultimately there are two people going through this experience together. How do we pull together? So a little more of the work I do. When we talk about, so I want to go back to what Robin said. I'm a big believer, because I too am a feminist, halachic feminist, a religious feminist. I'm coming out with this book called Uncovered: Jewish women's roles, mitzvot, and sexuality in Jewish law. I've tried very hard. I actually had thank you, two Gush scholars really edit it, and every so often one of them, who's a good friend of mine, said it's a little too angry there, rework it. So I've tried very hard. It's not an angry book. It's, I hope, I think, a beautiful book that is a meta halachic analysis of things like pants and hair covering and singing and nida. And the last chapter is on premarital sexuality, and talking about both the halachic analysis without compromising on what that is, and where it meets people in the work that I'm doing, and how people are responding in real time, and where we might add, again, ownership, agency, empowerment, recognizing the choices people are making and how that fits in also to the halachic discourse. So that's a little bit of what I was giving you tonight. That's why I think Naomi mentioned in the flyer that I'd be talking about my book. Hopefully it'll be out in 4 weeks. It seems like that 3 to 4 weeks. That's what we're at already. It'll be on Amazon. It'll be sold in bookstores here. But okay, so now that was my pitch. When I, as I said, I got to that because I said, I'm a feminist in the sense that I've been learning Talmud and halachic sources, and I believe women need to have voices in the halachic discourse, and women need to represent themselves in a halachic discourse. And really, that's been one of the big changes in the last, I would say, 20 years. So if I want to zoom out and look at Nida, we don't really know how women are experiencing Nida, to our dismay. We know how rabbis are bringing a little bit of women's voices in Shutim, in the responsa literature, a little through stories. A woman came and asked this, a woman came and did this, and so on. But what we don't have are really women's voices practicing or experiencing Nida. And that has changed enormously in the last 25 years. And it's changed in a way that I think has startled a little bit the halachic community or the rabbinic community, both with its forcefulness, women having, very, Baruch Hashem, strong voices and opinions, with its commitment. And so some of what we're seeing is women saying, we want to keep this desperately. This is so meaningful to our lives. And yet, what do we do with halachic infertility? And what do we do with nida d'oraita? And what do we do with going to the mikveh without a balanid? And what do we do with OCD? And what do we do with mental illness and touch? And what do we do with birth, where our husbands are now our birth partners, as opposed to even, I would say, 50, 60 years ago, men weren't in the birthing room. Things have, what do we do with female sexuality and awareness of sexual response cycles and differences and birth control and hormones? Women are amazing in the depth of their interest in being part of the conversation. And it's opened up windows into experiences that halachic authorities never knew women were having. And so that's why it's so significant and important. And I talk a little bit about that in my book, but I'll just use something that's not related to Harachako, going to the mikveh without a balanit, right? It won't occur to any rabbi, and I know this because I've talked to rabbis, that a woman would have an issue with another woman being in the room, right? That idea that there's any sort of tension for a woman to go to undress, to be naked in front of another woman was foreign, was an anathema. It was like, why would that be an issue? And women's voices saying, well, because of A, B, and C, because of deep discomfort with my body, because I've had surgery on my body, because I'm a very private person, because I have OCD, because I have sexual trauma, just because I don't like it. Those are things that are new to halachic discourse. The idea that women are speaking up and it flies in the face of really what tradition has said women have experienced. And I think it's really quite wonderful, because ultimately I think it's about greater halachic observance than maybe we've ever seen in terms of its exactness. I know the daughters of Israel have kept nida, but I think women are probably keeping it more precisely than they've ever kept it, because women have more access, whether it's for better or for worse, right? More access to halachic books, more access to kala teachers and yoatzot halacha and rabbis. And I think that that's actually something we don't think enough about. Women learn from their mothers, but a lot of times women knew the broad strokes, but not necessarily the particulars. And today we're so about the particulars. And so I want to acknowledge the wonder of the Bnot Yisrael. And so let me just finish up. I know it's 9. If I could have just 5 minutes, and then I'm happy to stay on to answer questions. I don't know how long we said this was going to be. It was 1 hour, right? 1 hour, yeah, okay. So to go back to what you said, Robin, I would really go in the direction of whatever men aren't supposed to do. I strongly suggest in creating non-sexual space, we use the same barometer, that women aren't supposed to walk around in a state of undress and men shouldn't walk around. Together as a partnership, we are creating this non-sexual space. And it's not more about one of us than the other of us. And whatever we're choosing to incorporate, we're incorporating together, and we're doing it in a way that is respectful to one another, and that it's not necessarily about my eating from your plate or you're eating from my plate, that we don't eat from each other's plates, we don't drink from each other's cups. And the idea is that together we're creating this framework that is both halachic and relational. And really, I think that lens, whatever you take, find your own voices in incorporating the pieces that speak to you. But I find that couples are often then empowered to feel like they can make it their own and not just be receiving something that's falling upon them. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy now to take some questions, and if there's anything I didn't get to, let me just make sure. We talked about public versus private. Thank you. One more question that did come in. Good question. Really, the only area in which there's room to be, I should say areas, Rav Sherlow writes about this. Couples today do not want everyone to know their nida. But as I said to a couple today, if you're big PDA people and you're constantly all over each other to the point that your friends say, oh my God, so much PDA, and you're not touching when you're nida, there's no way for me to permit you to hug and kiss each other or put your arms around each other just because it's uncomfortable for other people to know that you're nida. In other words, think about that. When you're not nida, maybe you need to dial back a little. Yeah, you can hold hands, whatever it is you do, but just recognize that there's no real way to preserve your halachically, to preserve your privacy if when you're not nida, you're behaving a certain way. When can I preserve or protect your privacy? When it comes to things like passing, when it comes to things like even, I was at a house, not me, but I'm a guest, and someone gives us one Kiddush cup. Now, first of all, after Corona, people are much more makpid, and not even spouses. We don't drink from each other's cups because he has a little cold, I have a little cold, and so on. So people are not looking quite as carefully at people not drinking from the same cup. I'm going to be honest, right? Things have changed. When everyone gets sick, we're much more like, oh, maybe you have the flu or COVID or something. But if you're in a situation where they give you one cup and you feel like everyone's going to look if I don't drink from the cup, drink from the cup. You're talking about a rabbinic fence. You're talking about klod habriot, right? The idea of preserving human dignity. And that's not the place to begin saying, oh, well, everyone knew and I went home and I was completely embarrassed, right? That's where there could be little tweaks, passing the baby. You're out in public and your husband says, hey, can I have the keys? Honey, I put them over there on the table, right? No one needs to do that. It could be much more discreet if you can think of a discreet way. If not, just hand the keys, right? In public, it's a fence on a fence, the passing. I'm not minimizing it, chas v'shalom, it's in the Shulchan Aruch, but as Rav Sherlow writes, I'm going to rely on him, sometimes making too big a deal of something that is not, is offense can lead couples to violate the earlier offenses, right? They'll be so upset, oh, I can't believe we're doing this, we're not doing this anymore, and then begin to be more lenient with things they should be more stringent with. So I think there is a distinction, and it's important to acknowledge the distinction. it's important to see some couples are Mesiras Nefesh. They really are. They want to keep it all for Hesia and in private, helping them figure out, well, what do I do? How would I handle this? Okay, let's talk about what could it happen that if you get one cup, you say, you know what, I have a scratchy throat. Could I have my own cup? No one's going to question that. No one's going to worry about that, right? Those, oh yeah, I could do that. Sure, of course, you're right. No one's going to think twice if I say I have a scratchy throat. They're just going to think they're not going to hug me maybe, but, and so on. So there, sometimes when we dial it back to little, like a little tweak, and oh yeah, I could do that. Then people don't have to be so anxious about what happened. And I like being proactive. I like saying, let's think about scenarios that concern you. How are you, as in the two of you, going to navigate this? And instinctively, you may do one thing, and that's okay. If someone says, hey, we're taking pictures, can you put your arm around, we're all putting our arms around each other, then I would say, before Hesia, Kvota Briot, do it. And then, you're not going to stand there and be like, no, I can't put my arm around her. And then everyone knows you're Nita. Some people will do that. And some people will say, you know what, to preserve our dignity, quick picture, and then we're going to go back to the way we normally interact. So I think I often say to couples, use your seichel. Just use your seichel. If you end up being smushed into the back seat together, do you really have to say, you know what, I really need to sit up front? You might say, I get car sick, can I sit up front? That might be one way to handle it. Or if you have no choice, you might say, okay, we're stuck together in the back seat. How great is this? We get to be cozy and it's not even our fault. So humor, seichel, those are also good words to use, and recognize we're all a little uptight in the beginning when we try something new. And I find the couples, of course, who are much less uptight are the couples who are going to touch after they're married. They're like, oh yeah, this is really interesting. Oh yeah, we'll do some of that. But the ones who are most uptight or most anxious or most fearful are the ones who really have a deep desire to incorporate as much as possible, but are anxious about what it's going to look like. And so holding some of that anxiety, saying you're going to be there to help, you're happy to talk to them afterwards, direct them. It's normal to be anxious, but working together, setting your goals and moving towards, also be kind to yourselves. You don't have, if some months are less goal meeting than others, you can always talk about it and start again. It's not all or nothing. It's a journey. And I think that's the case for marriages in general. It's a journey and there are ebbs and flows, and we just continue to sail on the journey together. Thank you very much. Sorry that I went a little bit over time. Happy to take some questions now. No, if there are no questions, I am happy to also let you go. Hopefully this is.
I do want to say thank you.
You're welcome. Hopefully this was helpful.
Yeah, I manage a mikveh where everything comes up, the whole spectrum. So it's very helpful. It's very helpful to hear the nuances.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, well, have a good night, everyone. Good seeing so many familiar faces. Talia, do I know you from somewhere, Weisberg? I know Eric Weisberg. Are you related?
No, not related to any Weisbergs. But you came to Maharad.
Oh, that's
boy. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, that was actually my first year at Maharad, and now I am graduating. So
okay, cool, great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mazal tov, and nice seeing you, and have a good night.